it doesn't take a lot to be a catalyst for change, but what it does take is a decision that you are more uncomfortable with what's happening to you than you are fearful of the consequences of speaking up about it. In 2015, the decision was clear that I didn't know why at the time, but I felt an unwavering certainty that what was happening was wrong, and that changes to the Marriage Act were grounded in deception and would have extreme consequences for children and society as a whole. So despite having two mothers that I'd imagine were not going to be particularly happy with me coming out against changes to the Marriage Act, I knew that I had to do it. And before I knew it, I joined the No campaign and was on my way to Canberra with Lyle Shelton, the director of the Australian Christian Lobby at the time, who I think is in the foyer. And also alongside my dear friend Katie Faust, the director of Them Before Us, who's doing phenomenal things in the children's rights space. The core point is, I started my life raised atheist, surrounded by people who mocked any expressed desire to know God. But as we know on this side of the fence, the truth has a ring to it. And I came out of my experience with the Coalition for Marriage a Christian. To this day, even now, it is still harder to come out as someone who believes in God than it ever was for me to say I have two mothers. And that's how we know something's going wrong here. The Coalition for Marriage read between the lines on this issue, and we have been vindicated 6 ways to Sunday. Saying no was the right decision. 5 years after the changes to the Marriage Act, we have drag queens in G-strings, gyrating in front of toddlers, reading ridiculous books to children in the library as standard practice. Books such as Who Are You? By a public school teacher, Brooke Pessin-Wedby, who flaunts her own children's joyful resistance to gender norms. I don't even know how to describe a lot of these things, they're just so ridiculous. But encouraging children to choose their gender solely based on how they feel is unstable, to say the least. Women in sport are losing to biological men, such as Leah Thomas, a transgender swimmer, who when competing as a man in the 200-yard freestyle, ranked 554th in the men's league, only to transition to a woman and be ranked 5th place weighed against female competitors. On the darker side of this, we have designer embryos created in a lab, children being exploited by pedophiles, adopted under the protection of rainbow tape, where nobody is comfortable enough to ask any real hard questions. We have commercial surrogacy, taking advantage of the wombs of vulnerable women overseas who are forced to turn a profit to survive. Human trafficking with extra steps. The extremist elements of the LGBT movement have an under-acknowledged predatory streak. Transgender activist Alok Vaid is a prime example of this. He recently toured Sydney last year and has been quoted calling little girls kinky, insinuating that transgender people aren't a threat to children in the bathrooms because children are impure and want to explore sexuality with adults. This is the sort of depravity we're dealing with, people, and I don't hear many voices talking about it. Additionally, parents are having their right to refuse their children gender-affirming care routinely challenged in family court, with vulnerable minors successfully pursuing Gillick competence so that they can consent to their own procedures, of which they don't understand the consequences of what they're doing. On the positive side though, thankfully, there is an uprising of LGBT people against child exploitation. Gays Against Groomers are a welcome addition to this conversation, shining light on child grooming and the mental and physical dangers of gender-affirming care. We're now facing, in Australia, even more devastating changes to our legislation though. It's far from over. The 2023 Family Law Act Amendment Bill on a federal level immediately threatens biological parents being prioritised in family court framework. This is incredibly serious, and I don't think it's got anywhere near enough attention for the consequences it could bring to us. And in New South Wales, Alex Greenwich, the member for Sydney, is creating an anti-conversion omnibus bill that will make its Victorian counterpart blush. He may as well call it an anti-religion bill, because that's really what we're talking about here. We are not talking about preventing people from being tied down and given shock therapy when we say anti-conversion. We are talking about a rejection of pastoral care, of being able to provide support to vulnerable young people and adults alike. So despite the fact that in New South Wales this bill doesn't even have a draft yet, it's already received an endorsement from Dominic Perrottet and the opposition leader Chris Minns. Yeah, I know. Both who proclaim to be Catholic, mind you. So looking at these incoming changes, I reflect on James. For what is faith without deeds? Does our discomfort with society outweigh our fear of being judged by those who oppose family values yet? What happened to anyone who knows the good he ought to do and doesn't do it? Sins. Well, I won't speak for anyone else, but I am uncomfortable. I am still uncomfortable